Ooh-wee! Well, howdy there, patriots and obedient vassals. Welcome back to another big old dose of Red Pill Politics. I'm your host, Dave Kopacz, and I want to welcome y'all to the show. Oh, boy, I'm as giddy as a schoolgirl. I can't believe it. In my own hometown, I've seen such tyranny, such big government starting to take a stranglehold on my community, my family, my friends, my loved ones. Unbelievable. And it's coming a lot of times from unelected commissions and councils, things like that, that really aren't government at all. And yet their policies, they certainly do have the effect of government. And I had to take a look. What's going on here? Why is this happening? Why are we losing our property rights? And boy, I'll tell you, what I found is that our local policies mirror Agenda 21. Agenda 21 is something from the UN. 1992 became soft law. George Bush signed it into soft law. Following year, Bill Clinton, first Sustainable Development Council of the President, and now it's everywhere. It's all over the place. Well, I decided this is far too big of a battle for little old Dave to take on, so I got the big guns with me today. Meet my guest, Mr. John McManus, President of the John Birch Society. Dr. Michael Coffman, who killed the Biodiversity Treaty. All right. Want to say thank you to everybody. For me, this is an incredible honor to actually be helping kick off the Live Free or Die rally right here in New Hampshire. It's unbelievable. It's not only the free state in the Live Free or Die state, it is the 6th annual Live Free or Die rally right here today, right now. Oh boy, I got to thank both of my guests for coming out. This is going to be one heck of a show, and I got to thank all the audience members. And for those who would like to keep in touch, get copies, links to the video when it becomes available, all your show ideas, comments, and hate mail, go to redpillpolitics@masslpa.org. Now, up here on this table, I've got some interviews that I've done with both of these men. I got a weekly radio show. I'm not going to be shut up because I know that questioning authority is good, but speaking with authority is better. So every week I get people like these gentlemen out there. So here, someone please take these, put them out, and share them with everybody you know, because we've got to start talking this stuff up. Now, there's plenty of them. I'm going to be giving them away all weekend. 13 hours of interviews that you can't miss. Oh boy, I'm all riled up here. I'm gonna take a deep breath here, and I'm gonna turn it over to John McManus. Tell us a little bit about himself and all the great things that he's done. Mr. McManus.
Well, Dave, I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. I got out of there. I discovered the color green, and I ended up going to Holy Cross College nearby. Did 3 years as a Marine Corps officer. Started a career as a electronics engineer. In 1966, I gave that up and went to work for the John Birch Society, which means that I've been at it over 40 years.
Incredible.
I started out as a field representative, and then they pulled me into the office and they wanted me to do some writing, and I started doing that, and then I became the public relations director. And I always say, if you hang around long enough, sometimes they make you president.
And they didn't. They couldn't have picked a better man for it.
Well, that's very nice of you to say that. Thank you. So that was 1991, and I've been the president since then. And let me tell you, it's been a joy. We were chatting with somebody a little while ago, and we decided that it's an exciting time to be alive.
Yeah, that it is.
And that's the way to look at it. You know, don't be afraid. It's exciting. The chance to turn things around and do something real good for yourself, your family, and civilization, it's all there. So that's a little bit about me.
Boy, once you get bit by that liberty bug, that's forever, isn't it?
That's right.
Well, I tell you, I've been doing an awful lot of work down in my neck of the woods down in Massachusetts and with Hal Shortliff. He's your regional director, and very much taken after your footprints, and very much a pleasure to work with. Dr. Michael Coffman, now you have got an accomplishment under your belt which to me, I got to thank you for saving this nation from what could have been an atrocity in that Biodiversity Treaty. But tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to this.
Well, I have a PhD in ecosystems analysis and climate change, and working in a multi-million-dollar research effort that I was directing back in the 1990s, and I began to realize there was things going on that did not jive with the real science that was happening. Everybody comes into this from a little different perspective. Mine was that the Clean Air Act was passed in 1991. It had nothing to do with trying to clean up the air. It was all politics. When I saw that and realized that literally millions of dollars worth of research was just thrown away in crafting this legislation, I actually started to track what was actually happening, where the money trail went, and realized that we had a huge agenda out there that was worldwide, and that Clean Air Act was just one little part of it. When I did that, I realized I could no longer be a scientist. I quit, and I tried to start helping people understand. And it was at that point, because of my background in ecosystems analysis, that I began to look at and see something called the Wildlands Project. And the Wildlands Project was a project basically to create or put one half of the United States into wilderness areas, wilderness reserves and interconnecting corridors. It was astonishing. I couldn't believe that anybody would even be thinking down these lines, but you have to understand their way of thinking. This is really what they want to do. And all of the 50% surrounded by about another 25% of actual buffer zones where human activity is kept to an absolute minimum. And then the Biodiversity Treaty was announced in 1992 at Rio de Janeiro on the Earth Summit, and although President Bush signed it, it wasn't until it came to President Clinton that he created the President's Council on Sustainable Development and actually brought that through to the point where he wanted to have it ratified. And so they took it to the Senate, and we stopped it once in July of that year, August of that year, and then it came up for reenactment back in September of '94, September 28th, 29th, and we basically showed the Senate a map like this that really clearly shows what is happening by setting aside one half of the United States into wilderness areas and basically shut the whole system down. It never actually came up for ratification. We shut it down about an hour before the cloture vote was to be scheduled.
That's wonderful. Now, you know, science is, we're seeing a lot of junk science now. I do not believe so. I went to college for environmental sciences, and what I learned about climate and glaciation is not what we're hearing in the mainstream media. At one point in time, we had a mile of ice over our heads, and it's happened multiple times. Now we're being told by men in fancy hats that it's us, that we're the plague on the earth. Well, let's start. I think it'd be best to have a general overview, first of all, with what exactly the United Nations is. Obviously, I don't hold them in very high regard. I'm more about local control myself. But, John, can you tell us, tell us about what brought about the United Nations, what makes it up, and why is it so dangerous to us?
Well, throughout history, there have been people who wanted to rule the world. And you can go back to Holy Scripture and you'll find that one of the first attempts at world government occurred at the Tower of Babel. When the Tower of Babel was being built, finally the Lord intervened, and all of a sudden people couldn't talk to each other. Their languages weren't similar. And so the people who could, amongst those, went off over here and they started a country, and then some others over here started another country, and that was the beginning of nationhood. And that says that nationhood is good. It was started by God. So over the course of the centuries, there have been many, many nations. Well, we finally get down to the good old US of A, and we see that we separated from Britain with the marvelous Declaration of Independence. And the whole philosophical base of the United States is right there.
Yeah.
Two little phrases right at the beginning. The first one says men are endowed by their Creator with rights. Didn't come from government, didn't come out of thin air, came from God. And the second point is, they said, to secure these rights, governments are instituted. So for one of the first times in history, you had everything in its proper order. You had God on top, you had individuals with their rights next, who used their rights to form a government for what purpose? To safeguard those rights and nothing more. Not to redistribute the wealth, not to take control of people's lives, not to do this and that and everything else. Safeguard. Government should be a negative force, and that's a concept that has been lost. All right, so the forces that wanted world government through the centuries, we could talk about the 1700s, the 1800s, and so forth, but let's speed it up here a little bit. We get to the end of World War I, a war that never should have been, like most of them. And we see at the end of World War I, it was proposed the League of Nations. It was proposed by Edward Mandell House and the Wilson administration. If you've never read the book called The Shadows of Power, I certainly recommend it. The history of the Council on Foreign Relations. That man started the Council on Foreign Relations. He's the one that wanted the world government. Well, the U.S. Senate debated the matter for 9 months and ultimately said no. And we certainly owe a big debt of gratitude to those senators who stood up against the League of Nations in 1919. So when the League failed, there were people already saying, well, we need another war. We need another war to get people more interested in having a world government. And so the punishments given to Germany and several other things that happened led to Hitler, led to all kinds of other problems. And then we started World War II, as you all know, in December 7th of 1941. Within several weeks of December 7th of 1941, there was a meeting held in Washington to start the process toward having a United Nations organization. Here we were attacked by the Japanese. We were also fighting against the Germans in Europe. And these people, their interest wasn't in that at all. Their interest was in the United Nations. And they were using the term United Nations early in 1942. So progressions. Finally, it comes down to toward the end of World War II, even before the war had ended, in July of 1945, the Senate was asked to approve the United Nations Charter. The war hadn't ended, and the attitude had been spread around the country that we've already had World War I and we've had World War II, we got to do something different. We got to have some different kind of an organization. And I can remember that. I was 10 years old at the time. I can remember that attitude. I remember my father saying, yeah, maybe we ought to give it a go. You know, he regretted that later. But so the attitude was such that there was nobody who was going to stop this plunge into world government. And so we got the world government. The United States Senate, that had debated the League of Nations for 9 months and said no, debated the United Nations for 6 days and said yes. And the vote in the Senate was 89-2. Only 2 senators said no. Now, they're all household names. You've all heard of Henrik Shipstead of Minnesota and William Langer of North Dakota. Haven't you heard of? You've heard of those people, yeah. Right? Someday we're going to have to build a monument for them. Right? But anyhow, even a good American like Robert Taft of Ohio, who was highly respected by people like yourselves in that era, he voted for the UN, regretted it very quickly, and even stated within a couple of years, the UN is a trap, let's go it alone. So I have asked audiences across the country how many have ever read the U.S. Constitution, and the numbers who have now are rising. Right? It used to be practically nobody. But now I ask people, how many have ever read the United Nations Charter? And not many have, right? I have a copy of it here, the United Nations Charter. This was originally published by the John Birch Society, and we now make photocopies of it. It's a war document. It's not a peace document. I want to read to you just one portion of it. Article 25. Who stole my glasses? All right, Article 25. Now, let's say you're a United States Senator. It's 1945. You're being asked to put your stamp of approval on this United Nations Charter. You get to Article 25, just one little sentence, and here's what it says. It says, the members of the United Nations agree to accept and carry out the decisions of the Security Council. Ladies and gentlemen, that trumps the Constitution. And 89 senators said yes to that. I dare say that many of those senators had never read the Charter, but the sentiment was so strong, we got to do something different, we got to have a UN, we got to have a world government.
Are you saying our legislators don't read the legislation? Is that what I'm to understand?
That has happened once or twice in history, hasn't it? Right. All right, so where do we go from there? Well, 5 years later, the United States was in a war in Korea. Was it declared war as required by the Constitution? No. Why did we go? Because the United Nations Security Council issued a decision saying all member nations should contribute to protecting South Korea. So we went to South Korea, and during that war, UN flags were actually flying over our troops. They didn't know any better. Well, the UN is still controlling that situation. The war in Korea has never been settled. We still have 30,000, 40,000 troops over there protecting a nation that is now selling automobiles to us, right? Kind of makes the sense that maybe they should be protecting themselves. So then we went to Vietnam under SEATO, the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, which is a regional arrangement under Articles 51, 2, 3, and 4 of the United Nations Charter. So the United Nations was running the war in Vietnam. We lost. The first time in history our country ever lost a war. Then we went into Iraq in the 90s, the 1990s. Why did we go to Iraq? Because a United Nations Security Council resolution. We are now in Afghanistan as well, under NATO, another regional arrangement under the United Nations. So the United Nations is running our military. Right? I served in the United States military. I served under, ultimately, United Nations Command. Happily, I wasn't involved in any combat. But there it goes. Now, I've been to the United Nations. I go to these places and I pick up some of their literature. I have here a United Nations flowchart. This is an organizational chart that the United Nations publishes itself. And if you go through all of the different categories of the organizations that are under the United Nations umbrella, you will see that the UN has established a presence and increasing control in the fields of education, population, children, women, environment, trade, finance, health, agriculture, labor, military, science, culture, atomic power, telecommunications, aviation, industrial development, narcotics, refugees, property rights, and more. It's all there, right on their own chart. The United Nations means to be the world government. Now, here's a point that I want everybody to remember. The United Nations is not taking over our country. Our country is being delivered to the United Nations. That's a big distinction. It's being delivered by traitorous influences in the government of the United States, at the executive level, at the judicial level, at the congressional level. And it's being delivered by the mainstream media, a lot of the clergy, and so forth. And it's got to be stopped. So who's going to stop it? Well, the John Birch Society said, get us out of the United Nations and get the United Nations out of our country more than 50 years ago.
How do we stop it?
We have educated an awful lot of people on that subject, all right? The gentleman asks, how are we going to get out of it? There was a vote just recently introduced by a congressman named Paul Brown from Georgia to defund the United States contributions to the United Nations. That would get us out of the United Nations. Happily, 177 members of Congress voted for that. Right? That couldn't have happened years ago. There is an awareness that is growing in our country. I like to say that the John Birch Society's influence is soaring, right? And it is, more so than I can remember in the 45 years that I've been involved in this organization.
Now, you've enjoyed massive boost in the numbers amongst your group, I noticed. In the last couple of years, there's many more people are getting involved. And obviously, there's no part of our lives that is not covered here.
Yes.
Okay? There's no room for liberty and freedom on this list. So we've got to start getting rid of these things that the UN is butting their nose into. Oh, boy.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague here, Dr. Mike. Mike, you're probably going to get into with Agenda 21. I can add a little more to that, but I just wanted to give everybody a kind of an overview of what the United Nations is, what is intended, and please remember, the United Nations isn't taking us over. We're being delivered by our own leaders.
Yes, and I want to pick up on that same thing based on what he has already said, John has already said on the United Nations. Created in 1945. In 1946, another adjunct to the United Nations called the IUCN, the International Union for Nature, was created as a scientific advisor to the United Nations. It was made up primarily of scientists from the different nation states that were members of the United Nations until 1972. In 1972, after the first Stockholm Earth Summit, the IUCN opened its doors up to non-governmental organizations like the Sierra Club, Nature Conservancy, and so forth. There are now 700 of these environmentalist groups, many of them radical environmentalist groups that are also members of the IUCN. What most people don't know, and I've tried to been telling Congress this for a number of years now, is that this is a closed-door meeting by the IUCN. You have environmental organizations meeting with the EPA, the Nature Conservancy, the EPA, the U.S. Forest Service, the Department of Natural Resources. All of our land management federal agencies are meeting behind closed doors with these environmental organizations and the United Nations Environmental Program, UNEP, and so forth, to develop what they call their eco-spiritual agenda. This was right in their website in the 1990s. I have a copy of the page. It's not there anymore because they realized that they were leaving themselves vulnerable for it. But they have an eco-spiritual agenda. In fact, the whole concept of sustainable development, if you understand it correctly, is based in a pantheistic belief system in which nature is God. And we have to understand that, to understand why they're doing this and what they're doing this and where it's going to take us. Now, the IUCN also writes almost all of the international treaties that we see coming along, including all of the Biodiversity Treaty that I helped stop in 1994, the Climate Change Treaty. All of these treaties were written by the IUCN at one time or another, very often years before they were actually brought out for ratification by the nation states. And the IUCN also is very instrumental in bringing this into your backyard because of the federal agencies that are involved. They developed their eco-spiritual agenda in order to actually bring that concept into their regulatory structures down in your backyard. It is an amazing thing. You have almost a flanking action by the environmentalists on the one hand and the federal agencies that are also IUCN members on the other hand. All of a sudden you're seeing all these things coming like a flood at you at the local level. It's because there's coordination. And then also they created what is called Agenda 21. Now, Agenda 21 was brought out at the Earth Summit in 1992 at Rio de Janeiro. It's a 40-chapter document that actually spells out how to control every human being on planet Earth on the very subject areas that John just mentioned a moment ago of the United Nations, property rights being key among them. Again, most people do not understand that property rights are the key, the foundation. Now, there are a lot of things that affect wealth, but property rights are the key, the foundation to wealth creation and your liberty. Our founding fathers knew that very clearly and stated that the whole purpose of government is to protect your private property rights. Going back to the IUCN has created this 40-chapter document. It's soft law. It doesn't have the teeth of law in it. And it basically spells out how every human being on planet Earth is going to protect the Earth as they see it. Not necessarily as the science shows it, but as they see how it must be protected. And that was then introduced into the United States, first by President Bush, who signed it, and then by President Clinton, as I said before, who then tasked what he called the President's Council on Sustainable Development to write up the regulations and how it was going to be implemented in the United States. This President's Council on Sustainable Development was staffed by 26 members, almost one-half of them members of the IUCN. So you see how it's controlled at every level as you go down until finally you get to the point where these people wrote up what is called Sustainable America in 1996, and then broke that down into 9 different working areas in 1997, I think it was, that then were accepted by all of our federal agencies. Now, this is very key to understand, that all of our federal agencies have now adopted Sustainable America and the principles that go to right to meet the Agenda 21 principles that control every aspect of our life. And every particular grant that a federal agency gives, I don't care who they give it to, it's got the Sustainable America fingers and strings attached to it that are linked right back into Agenda 21. And as John just said, it's not that the United Nations is taking over us, that we're giving us to the United Nations by this technique. We are literally handing the United Nations by complying with Agenda 21 through Sustainable America. So when you're asked by the press, understand that we're not being obedient necessarily to Agenda 21 directly, but we are through Sustainable America, developed by President Clinton, that now is driving our whole federal government, every particular grant that's given. If you've noticed that our highways are going to pot, because one of the things about Sustainable America is that we have made a very big shift in the 1990s away from federal highway funding to rapid transit. And we're seeing all kinds of light rail. Now we're spending about $9 billion a year on trying to develop high-speed rail and so forth. And it's sucking our whole highway system dry. We had the collapse of the bridge in Minneapolis-St. Paul a few years ago as one example, because we're not maintaining our highways the way we should. And it goes right back to Sustainable America and Agenda 21. Then, since most of those grants are granted to governmental agencies, our regional governance commissions or councils. Almost every place in the United States has combined regional governance, be it in several counties or several cities or whatever the case might be. These get a lion's share of these federal grants, and they develop a whole series of do's and thou shalt do's and thou shalt do nots, and where they're going to spend their money and so forth, all based on Sustainable America, and none of them are accountable to the citizens under their jurisdiction because they're not elected. And regional governance under any stretch of the imagination is unconstitutional and should be abolished, and abolished as fast as we can, because there is no accountability to these levels of governance to the American people.
Yeah, we're in trouble. You're exactly right. You're exactly right. Down in Massachusetts, we're in big trouble down there. We had our counties have been dissolved, basically. So we had regional government in place. All the talking heads said, oh, it's too expensive, too corrupt. So they tore it apart. And as soon as they did, they said, hey, you know what would be real efficient and less costly? Regional government. So they built their own. And that's what we got now. We got our regional planners and everything that you said about private property rights. You know, private property rights have been under attack for a while. In fact, it's the first plank of the Communist Manifesto, and it also shows up in this document. Maybe you can talk to this, Mr. Coffman. This is excerpts from the Global Biodiversity Assessment Report. And harvesting timber is unsustainable. Dams and reservoirs are unsustainable. Private property on page 767 and 782, unsustainable. All right, do you understand that the people that are shaping smart growth and sustainable development do not want you to own your property. They understand the importance of having that control. And also in Massachusetts, CLRPA, the Comprehensive Land Use Reform and Partnerships Act. Now tell me that doesn't sound a little shaky right up front. Well, you know, the character that created that, he was a senior contributor, is also the planner in Shutesbury, Massachusetts. And I just love bringing this out, and I'm going to tell just as many people as I can. Massachusetts is going to look like this if you don't wake up. New Hampshire is going to look like this if you don't wake up. These people are coming after you, and they're using committees and commissions within your own communities to do it. Everything that was on this list, everything under the environmental organizations you mentioned, not one of those creatures can we elect out of office. They are appointed. They are in there. We can get rid of Bush, and it goes on. We can get rid of Clinton, and it goes on. We can get rid of Obama, and it goes on. We are, the battlegrounds it's in our towns, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
I'd like to make a point here. We talk about Agenda 21. It sounds like there's an Agenda 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 21. No, the number 21 on it is that it's to be accomplished in the 21st century. That's the significance of the number Agenda 21. Now, what has happened is that the United Nations, working with several different portions of the government of the United States, have made available funds to filter down into the towns and cities across the country. And what has happened is that a lot of the local people at the town, city council, or town members, or whatever they are being bribed with taxpayers' money to implement the procedures that are obvious when you read Agenda 21. I can show you here examples of what is happening. Here's a check that went from the state of Massachusetts to the town of Dedham in Massachusetts, $179,000 to start implementing the procedures of Agenda 21.
Shame on you, Dedham, Massachusetts.
Right. Well, the interesting thing about it is none of these people in Dedham, Massachusetts have any inkling whatsoever that they are going along with a UN program.
Yeah.
Right? That's one of the key things. Now, here's another example. This is in the town of Marshfield in Massachusetts. And if you walk into the town hall, you see a great big display there about how we can be green, how we can do this and how we can do that and become part of the great green revolution that is going on.
But shame on you, Marshfield, Massachusetts.
Well, we can talk about that, but now let's talk about Carroll County in Maryland.
Oh, yes.
Right? Carroll County in Maryland, they had this program come in, and through the efforts of a couple of the members of the city council there, they finally decided to tell them to go home. They got rid of everything to do with this Agenda 21. It's being implemented through what is called ICLEI, I-C-L-E-I. I'm not sure I can remember
International
what
Council on Local Environmental Initiatives.
Thank you for rescuing me. Right.
Now, I want to point out, that's not what they call it now. They call it ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability.
Right.
Right.
So why? They changed that name because it was an instant backlash of the people. They realized that what was happening in their bedrooms and in their schools and in their communities was all being dictated by international sources. So,
Right.
I mean, that should tell you something about the group ICLEI in themselves.
Well, you can see that it has worked. The federal government is involved in financing. It comes down through the states. The states give it to these communities, like the check to Dedham, Massachusetts. And in order for you to apply for that and get the money, you have to go through this program guide here. This is called the Green Communities Program Guide. It's 11 pages of bureaucratese, and it pretty much has people who are persuaded that we have a green catastrophe going on, that the global warming is a problem and that there are other problems and so forth. It has a lot of those people, oh, this is wonderful, let's get involved in this, and so on. Again, not knowing that they're playing into the United Nations' hands. So it can be stopped. It was stopped in Carroll County in Maryland. is a community near Oklahoma City called Edmond, E-D-M-O-N-D. Edmond, a couple of the city manager people in that community had recently joined the John Birch Society, and all of a sudden found out what this Agenda 21 was, and then they looked and they found that it was being implemented in their community, and they got rid of it. And so it can be done.
Yeah.
And all across the country now, our people, all the members of the Birch Society, are working hard to educate some of the local people who have been sucked into this. We have a list of, 550 communities, cities, towns, and so forth that have already gotten involved in this. And that's just a small amount, but it's still substantial. And they mean to have all communities involved in this thing. Well, we're going to put a stop to it. And certainly any help that any of you can give would be most welcome.
One thing that I've noticed, and maybe you can touch on this for me, Mr. Coffman, is that some communities can actually not enroll in ICLEI and stop paying their dues, but they're being sucked in again with this proposal with the green communities because the ones that I've seen in Mass, they're to be accepted as a green community, and you look, I think it's on page 2 or 3, buried in there in one of the bullets, you got to use ICLEI software. I mean, that's got to be a direct IV right into our fusion centers in Boston, I can imagine.
Yeah, let me address that. I want to jump back to what John was saying first, and that is that 9 communities or 9 counties, cities, or whatever, have actually withdrawn from ICLEI over the last 6 or 8 months. It's astonishing. I've had a chance to share with what's happened in Maryland on a number of occasions, and basically they just dug in their heels and said, we're not going to do this. Once you understand that how it's connected back to Agenda 21, there is no justification. In fact, ICLEI was started as an organization to directly advance the Agenda 21 concept into your local community. That's why it was called International. And they had a webpage up until a couple months ago in which they actually stated that their purpose was to advance Agenda 21, the Convention on Biological Diversity, and so forth. I have a copy of that page. If you ever need it, get a hold of me and I'll email a copy of it to you so that you can show whatever county commission or city council or whatever supervisors you need to do, because it is directly linked back into the United Nations. Now, the key here is the fact that all of these programs are being advanced by the planning departments of the county, the city, whatever the case might be. The problem is that the county planning, or whatever planning department it is, are staffed with people who are educated in Agenda 21 concepts in the last 2 decades. They basically have this whole concept built into their whole educational process. And let me assure you that you cannot implement any of this stuff without violating the Constitution of the United States. It is diametrically opposed to constitutional principles. And what they are doing is, and they've wasted $30,000 or $40,000 or whatever they paid for their education. They're not necessarily bad people, but they have been so fully indoctrinated they can do nothing else than to plan in ways that will deny you your liberties. Property rights being number one amongst them. And as a result of this, the number one thing that I think most communities can begin to do is to get rid of their planning departments, except for those people who have to plan the utilities and so forth. Other than that, there shouldn't be any planning department, because as soon as you say that you're going to have this set aside for this particular purpose, you've denied all of those citizens any other use of their land, and you have denied other citizens who are not zoned in that area any opportunity for doing that. It basically denies you your liberties and the use of your land as you see fit best. And we need to get rid of planning departments. There are 2 organizations, there are many, but there are 2 that stand out. One is ICLEI that we've talked about. The other one is the American Planning Association. Now, most counties, most cities, and so forth don't have a whole lot of money. And as a consequence, comprehensive planning, like is happening in Massachusetts right now, in most states actually, it's expensive. And so what the American Planning Association does, which is joined at the hip with ICLEI, has created, through a $20 million grant from HUD back about 15 years ago, to create a whole set of documents, basically, that are templates for a plan for any kind of constituency. County, city, whatever the case might be. You take it off the shelf, you plug in your name and change it to fit your situation, and voila, it's done for pennies on the dollar.
Now, HUD's mentioned in this. This is the zoning reform that's pending in Massachusetts right now, and they want to put a lot of authority in their lap. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't they lose $95 billion, and when they were called on it, didn't they come out and say, well, we made an adjustments to the books? That's cooking the books, for crying out loud. And they just had a press release on it. And you know what? What you said, Mr. McManus, is right. You people took it. I'm getting more calloused as the years go on. I used to get up here and wave my flag and all that stuff. But I'm starting to pile more of the responsibility right in my own lap and the people out there. You know, government and entities like this, by virtue of their own existence, seek more power. And us as individuals seek more freedom. You know, and it seems that they want what they want worse than we do. So I'm going to take my own share of the blame, and I suggest we get off our hands and we get out there and start doing something, because it is there. It's pending in Massachusetts. You folks go to your own state website. It's there.
Yes.
You don't have to look far for this stuff, do you?
No, you don't. It's there. It's almost in every community. It's called by 1,000 different names. The Wildlands Project is being implemented piecemeal by 1,000 different names, but it's all the same purpose: to withdraw land from public use, from private use, and turn it over to nature in one form or another. And gradually, if you watch what they're doing, they're putting together these things so that there's a long corridor of these that interconnect existing wilderness areas or soon-to-be wilderness areas.
Now, they rewilded Shutesbury pretty good. See all these big green squares? There's lots of roads and families and farms and residences in there. These little yellow lines, okay, those are roads. And most towns call it rural residential. Well, here it's roadside residential. And if you're a lucky stiff that lives within 300 feet of these roads, you might be okay just a little bit. But boy, howdy, God help you if you live here in the conservation square. This is synonymous with sending zones in CLRPA for us. I'm sure you're going to see the same language, because we see the stuff from Agenda 21, the actual terms showing up in our local documents. So look for it. It will be there, and this is what rewilding looks like, folks. Go to Shutesbury. You'll see what I mean.
One of the things that I want to warn you about is conservation easements, because that's going to be a big part of what they're trying to do. Because they have made it so difficult to farm, to ranch, to do whatever you do on your land to make a dime, they've made it so difficult with 1,000 regulations that it's impossible to make a living on it anymore, and said, hey, we'll give you a favor. We'll give you a conservation easement, give you about 30% of the value of your land, but you can never develop it in the future. But you can continue to do what you're doing. And most people will go for that because it's usually a fairly significant amount of money. The problem is, there's two problems. First of all, you've basically stolen from your future and your grandkids and so forth, because your land is not worth much anymore. And secondly, down about 10 years from now, what they're going to do is to change the regulations concerning best management practices that they allow you to do whatever you're doing, to something that you can no longer do and make a dime on it. And all of a sudden, after about 10 or 15 years, you're going to find that you sold or you gave your land away to the government for about 30 cents on the dollar.
Now, would you gentlemen agree that more often than not, that government-managed property is often the worst managed property? I heard stories, one of your colleagues, as a matter of fact, Mr. Shaw, Michael Shaw from out in California, he was talking about national forest, and these aren't just fluffy names. These designations come with management plans, and largely I see it in the Quabbin, which is near where I live. They're considering a hands-off approach. Mother Nature knows best. Well, what's happened in some areas is these national forests, the hands-off approach, Mother Nature knows best, so the invasives, all the nasty things come in. Eventually a forest fire starts. Well, wouldn't you know it, these planners, they're working around the outskirts. They've convinced the people, well, maybe single-family homes aren't the best thing in the world, but they convinced those that are there just to sell the legislation, you're okay, you're grandfathered in. So, wonderful. They rezone, and remember, when you put a zone on something, you're taking someone's property rights. Well, boom, there's a fire. Takes a day or two for them to even fight the fires, just getting permission from the green coats to go out and cut a fire road. So, you know, the forest burns, the thing that we're supposed to cherish and preserve and want to help. We've mismanaged it, let it catch on fire, burns to the ground, and I'll tell you, it doesn't stop at the edge of the boundary. Burns right into those single-family homes. And all these people that said, oh, great, I'm grandfathered, are now saying, why can't I rebuild my house? So, I mean, this is incrementalism at its worst.
Yes. One of the other things I want to piggyback on what Dave just said, it's critically important that we understand that public lands are not being managed. They're literally not being managed because it's a hands-off approach. And it's resulted in utter decimation in some cases. I had the chance of driving a few years ago along a fire. I drove for 50 miles through this fire. And the reason it got that big is because they were not allowed to do anything for 2 days. Now, I have fought a lot of Western fires. I'm a Western boy. And the critical time is that first 4 or 5 hours where you can get it down to 1 or 2 acres and hold it there. Once you get beyond that, and if there's any adverse weather conditions like wind, it starts to have a life of its own. And I don't mean just because of the wind. It has a life of its own. And within 2 days, you can see 30 and 40,000 acres. Within a week, 500,000 acres. And this is the kind of fire that I was driving through in that 50 miles. If they would have been able to jump on that fire, and the local people were very willing to do that. They've had experience. A lot of them have bulldozers and so forth. They could have controlled that fire the first 5 hours. But they were not allowed to because they were arguing over whether or not that equipment would endanger an endangered species. Now, that species was burned up anyway, but the fact is that it held them from doing anything for 2 days.
I guess you can say that whatever government touches goes down.
Yeah, right? You're absolutely correct.
You know, there are a couple of really good examples of that. You go to, just look at the federal government involvement in education. Started in the 50s, then they started a Department of Education in the Carter administration. The level of education quality was here, and as more money went in, the quality went down.
Absolutely.
Right? And today it's unbelievable, right? How about the housing department? We have housing and urban development, right? Somebody find those words for me in the Constitution.
Or even the concept.
It's not there.
It's not there.
Well, who brought on the housing bubble, and didn't that bring on the recession that we're now suffering in? Another success of the government, right? Well, they started an energy department when we were importing 30% of our energy, and they've been at it tens of billions of dollars year after year after year, and now we're importing 70%.
Right.
So they succeeded again.
And we actually have enough oil, natural gas, and coal in this country to last us at full use for several hundred years. It's an amazing thing. The whole energy crisis is created by government, entirely created by government, because we have more oil and more natural gas than we know what to do with.
And we get the government out of the way, and then we be producers again.
I mean, they're using oil and resources as part of their geopolitical strategy. We have it, we don't want to use it, and we want to control and direct everyone else's resources.
Well, we got to be careful. There might be a spill.
Yeah, a little one. Boy. Well, we got about 10 minutes left. I'd like to give each of you gentlemen some time to give the folks a take-home message. Give them something that they can do, that they can go home in their community and aggressively push this stuff back.
Well, first thing I'd like to say is that I mentioned that a congressman named Paul Brown down in Georgia introduced a bill to defund the United Nations, or to stop the United States sending dues or funds to the United Nations. Now, I would bet that very few people in our audience, and maybe very few people who are going to see the TV here of this program, had any idea that this measure came before the U.S. Congress. All right, so how do you find out about things like that? Well, we have the New American Magazine, our John Birch Society publication, and we make people aware of this kind of thing. But there's also a bill in Congress introduced by a congressman from Texas named Ron Paul.
Whoa, my boy. Here for Ron Paul.
H.R. 1146, which says get us out of the United Nations.
Right.
I mean, that's not just the dues part of it. This is just withdrawing the United States from the entire United Nations organization. If your congressman hasn't heard from you that he should support this measure, he should hear from you.
Yes.
H.R. 1146.
Wonderful. Now, how can folks get in touch with you? And let's hear the website.
The website is the John Birch Society, jbs.org. Or if you want, you can go to the newamerican.com. The New American, all like it's one word and all lowercase, thenewamerican.com.
That's a wonderful magazine. In fact, I've got issues of it. There's a special Agenda 21 article. If you go over to Vendors Row, check me out over there. You got to read this and understand the stuff and know your enemy, basically, because they're all around you here. Mr. Coffman.
Yeah, I would support that. In fact, I really highly recommend the New American, but I even go beyond that. In my talks now, I'm talking all over the country. I'll be gone every weekend now till probably November. And I talk about the fact that the only organization that has been trying to expose this agenda for the last 40 years, almost 50 years? 53 years is the John Birch Society. And they had it right from the beginning, and what they have basically said is now coming true. If you need to give some legs to what you want to do, and I'm not saying this because I'm a big supporter of the John Birch Society, but it is a tremendous organization for you to help to educate you and to also put legs to your action. But also join Tea Party groups that are in your area. Pick out a particular area because you can't fight everything. And then really put some energy into it, because I'm telling you that we need to take back this 2012 election so that we can put into office some really rational, constitutionally based people and begin the process of taking us back to a constitutional government. And that's going to take a while, but we need to start, and we need to start in 2012. Made a big dent in 2010, and it's primarily because of you guys out in this listening audience right now that actually put legs to your actions and made it happen across this country. And I really take off my hat and salute to you. It's a tremendous thing. But get involved at your local level. Write letters to the editor, even though that doesn't seem like it does any good. You'd be surprised how many people actually do read that. And you have to be nice. You can't be nasty. You have to be, because they're not even going to publish it if it's nasty. And it's going to be hard to publish it even if it's well written. I don't mean educatedly well written. I mean in the sense of your temper and so forth. Just because your editors nowadays were trying to cut off all discussion showing the other side of the story. But where you can write letters to the editor, do so. Begin to attend your county commission, your city council meetings and so forth. If they're bringing up something that needs to be exposed, begin to petition this. Now, one of the things that you will find, it's also true in the state legislature during the hearings, they will give you 5 minutes or 3 minutes to talk. If it's really important, get like-minded people and then split your talks amongst the three, and then sign up in sequence so that over a period of 10 or 15 minutes, you put out your entire concerns and so forth, rather than having it fragmented. Just get coordinated in this process, and to do that, you have to do it in groups.
Yeah, I mean, that's how they've done it against us. And I've become perfectly comfortable talking about this. I used to see people cringe and whatnot, but what we have let develop around us, when you have an apex council like ICLEI, who just assumes that Agenda 21 is the thing that it's going to endorse, and the whole network underneath them, every other unelected commission and committee and 501c3 and NGO, they all line up and they pledge to do the same. When you've allowed a system like that to take control around you, I submit to you, you have a Soviet system. That's exactly what it is.
It really is.
So we have got to always look with great skepticism at any group that you can't elect the bums out. In here, these are all appointed. We can't elect them out. Their agenda goes on. So we have to go to our elected officials right in our town halls and city halls. Bring the information. For crying out loud, it's there. It's at the Freedom Advocate site. That's what drew me to Mr. Coffman, is I was actually out researching land trust and Agenda 21, because what I was seeing in their documents, I remember going back, because I was never this fired up on Agenda 21 as I am now. And I saw the parallel was as clear as a bell. So it's happening all around you. Please feel empowered, because this is something, without a doubt, that you can start incrementally taking back. because it was incrementalism and harmonization that got us here in the first place. So it's going to be a hard battle. It's going to be a long battle. But boy, howdy, it's one that's got to start now. We do not have any time to spare. So
and let me just caution you right now. The only way they can fight you, because they can't fight you with facts. They almost all of what they have is propaganda. There are very, very few facts to back them up. You have the facts. Make sure you use their documents against them. They're easy to find, and you can't argue if you have their documents that you can use against them. But how they will fight you is by vilifying you, by demonizing you, by calling you all kinds of names. If you have that happen to you, you can expect it's going to happen to you. Be proud. You're doing a good job.
Yeah, you're striking at the root.
You're striking at the root. Don't get offended. Don't feel bad or coward or anything. You realize that you are doing a very positive thing. And also, I want to plug my book, I guess. The Rescuing a Broken America back there has all of this outlined. You know, if you took a thorough look at it, it would require several thousand pages, and I boiled it down. But it does tell you everything from A to Z, what is going on, and how you might be able to effectively protect yourself.
Now, how what's the website and email? How can people get in touch with you?
Well, my book's website is rescuingamericabook.com. Rescuingamericabook.com. And it's powerful. My website for the company is epi-us.com. EPI-US. You can also get to all that other stuff through that website as well.
Excellent. Well, I got to thank both of you gentlemen for coming all the way out here to New Hampshire. This has been great. And I got to thank everyone here, Gene and everyone, all the organizers. I mean, I'm just so honored to be able to come out to Live Free or Die, the free speech rally in the nation. It's just a great honor. And especially to have two wonderful gentlemen like yourselves that have been out there fighting the fight for a long time. I thank both of you very much. And as always, show ideas, comments, and hate mail to redpillpolitics@masslpa.org. I do read them all, and I will respond.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
All right. Fly your flags high, keep your powder dry, and we'll see you next year.